Ashes of the Ninth Orbit. Chapter 1. The Exile of Aurelion. The first lesson Tales ever taught him was that truth did not belong to kings. "Who decides what is remembered?" the old philosopher had asked, pacing slowly beneath the vaulted glass of the Imperial Observatory. Beyond them, stars burned in ordered constellations, mapped, named, claimed. Aurelion had been 12, restless, already weary of ceremony. "The historians!" Aurelion did not answer that time. Years later, he would realize that was the moment everything began. As the firstborn son of Emperor Virex, Aurelion was expected to embody continuity, strength without cruelty, authority without question. The court adored him in public and measured him in private. He was watched constantly, by advisors, by rivals, by those who smiled too easily. But it was in private that he was shaped. Thalas refused to teach him obedience. Instead, he taught him doubt. They studied not just imperial history, but the absences within it, the erased conflicts, the vanished systems, the references that led nowhere. Again and again, Thalas pointed to anomalies. "Empires do not forget by accident," he would say. "They forget by design." Among these omissions was a recurring myth, a civilization that predated the empire itself. No official texts acknowledged it, yet fragments appeared everywhere, in obsolete navigation routes, in outlawed star charts, in architectural patterns that no longer had an origin. Precursors, Thales called them. If they existed, they were not conquered. They were erased. "Why?" Aurelion once asked. Thales looked at him for a long time. "Because what they left behind frightened someone powerful enough to bury it." When the emperor died, the questions stopped. Not because they were answered, but because asking them became dangerous. The death was sudden. Too sudden. Officially, it was a failure of the body. Age, strain, inevitability. But the court shifted overnight. Alliances snapping into place with unnatural precision. Cassian moved quickly, younger by 8 years. Aurelion's half-brother had always lived in his shadow. Pleasant, forgettable, easily dismissed. But beside him now stood Serith, his wife, whose presence sharpened everything. She spoke little in public, but influence radiated from her like gravity. Within days, Cassian was declared emperor. Within weeks, the court began to close around Aurelion. At first, it was subtle. Invitations withdrawn, advisors reassigned, loyal officers transferred to distant systems. Conversations ended when he entered a room. Then came the accusation, treason. It arrived without warning, delivered in the quiet formality of sealed decree. No trial, no public spectacle, just a statement. Evidence had been found linking Aurelion to seditious elements in the outer systems. It was absurd. It was also final. "You taught me to question truth," Aurelion said when Thales came to see him one last time, under guard. "So tell me, what is this?" Thales did not hesitate. "A narrative. And the truth?" The old man's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes hardened. "The truth is that you were never meant to rule," Aurelion almost laughed. "I am the firstborn, and therefore the greatest threat." Silence settled between them. "Listen carefully," Thales said, stepping closer despite the guards. "There are things you were taught for a reason. The gaps in history, the hidden roots, the idea that something older still exists beyond the Empire's reach. You think I will need them?" "I think," Thales said quietly, "that survival will depend on what you choose to remember." The guards moved then, ending the conversation. Aurelion did not see him again. The transport vessel was small, unmarked, and efficient. No ceremony marked his departure. no witnesses. Officially, the heir had already fallen from grace, his removal little more than a procedural necessity. He was escorted in silence, his insignia stripped, his name unspoken. Exile, they called it. But Aurelion understood. This was not exile. It was erasure. The destination was a prison world at the edge of mapped space, a place few ships reached and fewer left. Even if he survived the journey, he would disappear there, forgotten. Cassian would rule unchallenged. Serith would ensure it. Aurelion spent the first hours in stillness, replaying every decision, every conversation, searching for the moment he had failed to see this coming. There was no single moment, only the slow realization that he had underestimated them. He slept eventually, not out of peace, but exhaustion. When he woke, the ship was breaking apart. The explosion did not come as a single event. It began as a tremor, subtle, almost indistinguishable from normal engine fluctuation. Then came the alarms, sharp and insistent. The artificial gravity flickered. Lights dimmed. Aurelion was thrown against the bulkhead as the vessel lurched violently. Voices shouted from beyond the sealed compartment, then cut off abruptly. The next impact tore through the hull. Cold flooded the chamber, biting absolute. Emergency seals slammed into place, but it was already too late. Systems failed one by one. The ship was no longer traveling. It was falling. Aurelion dragged himself toward the emergency harness, securing it with numb hands as the world tilted around him. Through the fractured viewport, he saw it, a planet, dark, barren, waiting. The realization settled with terrible clarity. This had never been an accident. The crash was fire and silence. When he regained consciousness, the world had narrowed to pain. The air was thin, metallic. Smoke curled through the shattered remains of the transport. Somewhere nearby, something hissed. Coolant or atmosphere escaping into nothing. Aurelion tried to move and failed. For a long time he lay there, staring at the broken sky through the torn hull, wondering if this was where it ended. Not with execution, not with ceremony, but with absence, erased. The thought should have frightened him. Instead, it clarified something. If they believed him dead, then he was no longer bound by what he had been. No title, no expectation, no visibility. For the first time in his life, Aurelion Virex did not exist. The idea settled into him like a seed. Footsteps approached, not imperial, not orderly, uneven, cautious, accompanied by the distant hum of scavenger engines. Shapes appeared at the edge of his vision, figures in patched armor, voices rough and unfiltered. "Alive," one of them said. "Barely. Worth something?" A pause. "Maybe." Aurelion closed his eyes as they lifted him from the wreckage. The last thing he saw was the broken remains of the life he had known, scattered across an empty world. The first thing he understood was that he had survived, and survival, Thales had once said, was the only truth that mattered at the beginning. Everything else could be rewritten, including who he would become. Chapter 2: The Ghost of Empires Past. They called him Ash because he had nothing left that could burn. The name was given without ceremony, the way most things were among the scavengers. Names were not inherited here. They were assigned, discarded, replaced as needed. Identity was fluid, tied to usefulness more than history. Aurelion accepted it without resistance. Ash survived. That was enough. The pirates did not resemble the stories told in the Imperial Corps. There were no grand banners, no roaring war cries, no romantic defiance. They were scavengers first, patient, methodical, and cautious to the point of paranoia. They lived in the graveyards of space. The planet where Ash had crashed, designated only as Capri Null, was not truly dead. It orbited within a vast debris field, the remains of ancient conflicts and collapsed infrastructure. Broken ships drifted endlessly in its orbit, some centuries old, others newer, their origins deliberately obscured. The pirates harvested them. Metal, fuel, data cores, anything of value was stripped and repurposed. Nothing was wasted, nothing was trusted, and no one asked questions they did not need answered. Ash learned quickly. He learned how to move in low gravity without wasting energy, how to read the silent language of scavenger crews operating in vacuum, how to tell which wrecks were safe and which were traps left behind by others like them. More importantly, he learned how power functioned among them. It was not claimed, it was tested. The captain of the crew that found him was a man named Virex, broad, scarred, and governed by a simple principle: control through fear. He ruled not through loyalty, but through unpredictability. Punishment was swift and often excessive. Rewards were rare. It worked, for a time. Ash said little in those early months. He observed, listened, remembered. Thor's voice lingered in his thoughts, not as instruction, but as method. Who benefits? Who decides? What is being hidden? Patterns emerged. Virex maintained control by keeping his crew divided. Information was fragmented. Navigation routes were known only to him and 2 lieutenants, both of whom distrusted each other more than they feared him. Resources were hoarded, then redistributed selectively. Conflict was encouraged. It was not leadership. It was containment. Ash began to ask questions, not openly, not dangerously, but carefully placed. A remark here, a doubt there, enough to let others arrive at conclusions on their own. He did not challenge Virex. He made Virex weaker. The fracture came during a salvage operation. The target was a drifting military transport, old, but intact enough to suggest valuable systems remained on board. Virex ordered a rapid boarding, overriding standard caution protocols. Ash noticed immediately the approach vector was wrong. The ship's rotation did not match its drift. Small inconsistencies, easy to ignore, unless one had been trained to notice what did not fit. "A trap," Ash said quietly to one of the crew. The man hesitated. "You sure?" "No," Ash replied, "but Virex is." The implication spread faster than any direct accusation. By the time the boarding team reached the airlock, doubt had already taken hold. When the trap triggered, automated defenses reactivating, cutting through the first wave. The result was chaos. Virex survived, but something else did not. Certainty. It took 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of whispered conversations, of carefully revealed information, of alliances forming in the shadows of broken corridors. Ash never positioned himself at the center. He positioned the truth. By the time the confrontation came, it did not feel like a rebellion. It felt inevitable. Virex was not defeated in a dramatic duel. There was no spectacle, no declaration. His own crew turned on him, not out of loyalty to Ash, but out of recognition that the system he maintained no longer served them. Ash did not claim leadership. He accepted it when it was offered. That difference mattered. Under Ash, the pirates changed. Not immediately, not completely, but direction shifted. Raids became precise, targeted. Risk was calculated, not embraced. Information was centralized, not to control, but to coordinate. Most importantly, Ash introduced something the crew had never truly operated under: trust. Not blind trust, not idealism, but a functional understanding that survival improved when individuals were not deliberately undermining one another. It was enough. The crew grew. Other scavenger bands joined them, not out of allegiance, but because efficiency attracted survival. Over time, Ash's fleet began to take shape, not as a single entity, but as a network. Invisible, adaptive, patient. The discovery came by accident, or perhaps, as Thales would have argued, there was no such thing. The target was unremarkable. A derelict archival vessel, its structure largely intact, but its systems dormant. These ships were rare and often dangerous. Data was valuable, but heavily protected. Ash led the boarding himself. Inside, the ship was preserved in eerie stillness. Rows of data vaults lined the interior, their surfaces untouched by time, but locked behind layers of encryption. Most crews would have stripped what they could and left. Ash did not. He recognized the architecture. Not fully, but enough. The patterns embedded in the systems, the structure of the data indexing, it echoed something he had seen before, years ago in the Imperial archives. Fragments Thales had shown him. Empires forget by design. This ship had been forgotten, which meant it had been hidden. Ash ordered a full extraction. It took days. When they finally broke through the encryption, what they found was not history. It was a map. The coordinates did not align with any known system. They existed in the margins, regions of space considered unstable, impassable, or simply irrelevant. But layered beneath the map were annotations, symbols, references. Ash felt something shift as he studied them. Recognition. Not conscious, not immediate, but buried memory rising to the surface. Lessons half forgotten. Questions unanswered. The precursor civilization. Not a myth. Not erased completely. Hidden. The first sight nearly killed them. The approach required navigating a collapsing corridor of warped space, a region where conventional sensors failed and time itself seemed inconsistent. 2 ships were lost before they even reached the coordinates. The third made it through. What they found was not a ruin. It was intact. A structure. Massive. Silent. Orbiting a dead star. Its surface was smooth, unmarked by damage or decay. It did not respond to scans. It did not appear on any known registry. It should not have existed. Ash felt it before he understood it. This was what had been erased. Gaining entry was not an act of force. It was an act of understanding. The systems did not respond to commands, but they responded to patterns, sequences, logic structures that mirrored the philosophical frameworks Thales had drilled into him. Questions, answers, relationships between them. Ash did not override the system. He conversed with it. When it opened, it did so without resistance. Inside, the impossible became real. Ships, hundreds of them, dormant but fully intact, constructed from materials the crew could not identify, systems that operated without visible power sources, interfaces that responded to thought as much as touch, and, at the center of it all, an intelligence, not artificial in the way imperial systems were artificial, not constrained, not obedient, aware. It did not speak, but it understood, and, slowly, it began to respond. They did not leave unchanged. The fleet that emerged from that dead system was no longer a collection of scavengers. It was something else. Their ships moved differently. Faster, quieter, harder to detect. Their weapons adapted in real time. Their ability to navigate unstable regions of space became unmatched. They were no longer surviving in the margins. They were operating beyond the Empire's perception. Ash said nothing of what they had found. He did not name it. He did not explain it. He simply used it. The Empire began to notice. Supply lines failed without explanation. Patrol fleets vanished in regions previously considered secure. Communication relays went dark, then reactivated under unknown control. Reports filtered back to the core systems. Fragmented, inconsistent, impossible to verify. A shadow, a presence, a force that did not behave like any known adversary. Cassian responded with increased force. Serith with increased control. Entire sectors were locked down. It did not help, because Ash was not fighting the Empire directly. He was dismantling it, piece by piece, system by system, myth by myth. And still, he did not reveal himself. Not yet, because power, he had learned, was not in being seen. It was in being believed. And the galaxy was beginning to believe in something it could not see. A ghost moving through the ruins of empire. A question without an answer. A force that could not be erased. Just as Thales had once promised. Chapter 3. The Reckoning of Blood and Stars. The rebellion had no face. That was its strength. Across the galaxy, systems began to slip free, not in grand declarations, but in quiet fractures. Governors vanished. Imperial signals went unanswered. Supply routes failed, then rerouted under unknown command. Entire sectors fell into a strange, coordinated silence. No leader stepped forward. No symbol unified them. Only a pattern. And at its center, unseen, was Ash. He did not rush the end. Years of preparation had taught him that empires did not fall to force alone. They collapsed when their illusion of inevitability was broken. Cassian still held the core systems, still commanded vast fleets, still spoke with the voice of authority. But fewer listened, and more importantly, fewer believed. Ash moved carefully, orchestrating pressure rather than confrontation. Communications were intercepted and rewritten. Loyalist fleets were redirected into empty space or into one another. Key figures within the empire found themselves isolated, their authority intact in name only. It was not war, it was disassembly, and Cassian could feel it. In the imperial capital, paranoia took root. The palace, once a symbol of absolute control, became a fortress of suspicion. Advisors were replaced, then replaced again. Generals were recalled, interrogated, executed. Serith remained composed. She saw what Cassian could not. "This is not chaos," she told him, her voice calm as ever. "It is design." "Then show me the designer," Cassian snapped. "He will reveal himself," she said. "Men like this always do." She was right, but not in the way she expected. The final operation began without announcement. At the edge of the capital system, something impossible occurred. Ships appeared where no ships should be able to exist, not emerging from hyperspace, not detected by sensors, simply present, as if they had always been there. Ash's fleet, invisible no longer. Panic spread through the Imperial defenses. Orders were issued, countermanded, overridden. Fleets scrambled into formation, but their coordination faltered. Systems disrupted from within. Communications fractured. Ash had not just reached the capital. He had already infiltrated it, using precursor pathways, ancient corridors buried beneath layers of forgotten space. His forces had bypassed the Empire's greatest defenses before the battle had even begun. By the time the first shot was fired, the outcome had already shifted. Still, Ash did not strike the palace. Not immediately. Instead, he transmitted a signal broad, undeniable, cutting through every layer of Imperial communication. For a moment, the entire system stilled. And then, for the first time in years, Aurelion Virex spoke. "I was meant to die." His voice carried across fleets, across stations, across every world still bound to the Empire. "They told you I was a traitor, that I turned against what I was born to protect." A pause. "They lied." He did not appear at first, only his voice, steady, controlled. "I was removed because I asked questions, because I was taught that truth does not belong to those who rule, but to those who seek it." Across the system, hesitation spread. "I am Aurelion Virex, firstborn son of the Emperor. The heir you were told had fallen. Now he appeared, not as a prince in regalia, but as something else, marked by years of survival, shaped by something far beyond the court he had once known. I did not return to reclaim a throne." His gaze hardened. "I returned to end it." The effect was immediate. Some Imperial forces stood down. Others hesitated. A few, loyal beyond reason, prepared to fight to the end. Within the palace, Cassian's composure finally fractured. "He lives," he said, as if the words themselves were impossible. Serith watched the transmission in silence, her expression unreadable. "Then we end it properly," she said. They requested parley, a final negotiation, broadcast to all, an attempt to reclaim control, to frame the conflict as a matter of legitimacy rather than collapse. Ash agreed, not because he trusted them, but because he understood them. The meeting took place within the throne chamber. Once a symbol of imperial unity, it now stood hollow, its grandeur intact, its meaning stripped away. Ash entered alone. Cassian stood at the far end, flanked by guards. Serith remained at his side, composed as ever. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Cassian laughed. Short, sharp, disbelieving. "You should have died." "I did," Aurelion replied. The name hung in the air, no longer hidden. Serith stepped forward slightly. "And yet, here you are, leading a rebellion you refuse to name, wielding power you do not explain." Her eyes studied him carefully. "You could still take the throne," she said. "End this instability. Rule as you were meant to." Aurelion regarded her calmly. "You mistake me for someone who still wants what you took." Something flickered in her expression, just for a moment. Then she smiled, and the guards moved. The assassination was swift, precise, planned down to the smallest detail. Hidden weapons activated. Energy fields collapsed inward. Every angle accounted for. They had not come to negotiate. They had come to finish what they started. But they had miscalculated. Aurelion did not react with surprise. He had expected it. The first strike missed, not by chance, but because he was no longer where they thought he would be. The room itself shifted. Precursor systems responding, altering space in subtle, disorienting ways. Chaos erupted. Guards fired. Countermeasures triggered. The chamber fractured into overlapping fields of motion and light. Cassian lunged forward, desperation overriding strategy. Serith did not move. She watched, calculated, waited. And then something unexpected happened. The last general of the Imperial fleet, standing among Cassian's loyalists, lowered his weapon. He had served the Empire his entire life, believed in it, defended it. But this was not defense. This was desperation. "This is not order," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is fear." Cassian turned, furious. "Stand down!" The general did not move. Instead, he looked at Aurelion, at the truth standing in front of him, and made a choice. The intervention was decisive. He moved faster than the others, redirecting fire, disrupting the assassination sequence, forcing Cassian and Serith out of position. Not to save Aurelion, but to stop them. The confrontation collapsed into its final moments. Cassian, cornered, lashed out. No longer a ruler, but a man stripped of illusion. Serith followed, her control slipping for the first time. It ended quickly, violently, and finally, the general did not survive it, but neither did they. Silence fell over the chamber. Then, slowly across the system, the Empire, what remained of it, had just watched its rulers fall, not in glory, but in truth. Afterward, there was no coronation, no declaration of a new empire. Aurelion stood before what remained of the galaxy and did the one thing no one expected. He let it go. The structures of imperial control were dismantled, not replaced, but dissolved. Systems were given autonomy. Power was distributed, fragmented, made intentionally difficult to centralize again. The technologies he had uncovered, the weapons, the fleets, the knowledge, were hidden once more, not destroyed, guarded. And then, when it was done, he disappeared. No announcement marked his departure. No ship was seen leaving. No record traced his path. One day, he was there. The next, he was not. Some claimed he had returned to the outer dark, watching from beyond the edges of known space. Others believed he had become something else entirely, no longer bound to a single life, but to a purpose, a question, a presence, a reminder that empires could fall, that truth could survive, and that somewhere beyond the reach of power, someone was still asking the questions that no ruler could afford to answer. Thank you for listening. If you like this story, please subscribe for more.